He thought he could steal my wife, humiliate me in front of everyone, and walk away untouched. What he didn't know was that I had the patience of a soldier and a plan that would leave him with nothing. This is how I brought a millionaire to his knees and made my ex watch every second. If you've ever been betrayed, disrespected, or made to feel like you weren't enough, hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready. Because this isn't just a story about revenge. It's about taking back your power and making the people who hurt you wish they'd never crossed you. The first time I saw Sarah, I was standing at the edge of a crowded fundraiser in the Capitol, the kind where the air hums with polite laughter and whispered deals. I wasn't supposed to be there. It was a last-minute invitation from a colonel who thought introducing a decorated young officer to the right political crowd might do my career some good. I'd been home from deployment for only 3 weeks. My uniform still carried the faint scent of desert sand no matter how many times it had been cleaned. My mind was still halfway across the world, cataloging the faces of the men I'd led, the ones I'd lost, the things we'd done to survive. But when Sarah walked into the room, everything else blurred. She didn't belong there either. Not really. There was a warmth in her eyes that didn't match the calculated smiles of the other guests. Her dress was a deep emerald, clinging just enough to catch the light without screaming for attention. She wasn't loud, but she drew the eye. She drew my eyes. I remember thinking, don't stare. You're still in uniform. Behave. But she caught me anyway. And instead of looking away, she walked straight toward me, as though we were the only 2 people in the room. You look like you'd rather be anywhere but here, she said, her lips curling into a smile that made my chest feel too tight. Is it that obvious? I asked. To me? Completely. She tilted her head, studying me like she was reading a classified file. So, where would you rather be, Lieutenant? Carlos Ramirez, I said, shaking her hand. And I'd rather be somewhere quieter. From that moment, it was as if the noise of the fundraiser faded into the background. We talked for an hour about nothing and everything. She was quick-witted, sharp without being cruel, and she laughed like she actually meant it. I've been trained to read people. In my line of work, trust could be the difference between life and death. And everything about Sarah felt safe. Over the next few months, we saw each other whenever I was home. She wasn't intimidated by my rank or my schedule. In fact, she said she admired it. She liked that I was disciplined, driven, a man with a mission, as she put it. She made me feel like I wasn't just a soldier in uniform. I was a man worth knowing, worth loving. When I proposed to her, it wasn't in some grand display. It was at her favorite little Italian place, just after closing, with the chef pretending not to watch from the kitchen. I didn't even finish my speech before she said yes. The wedding was small but beautiful. Sunlight streaming through the old church windows, friends and family laughing as we walked out into the summer air. I wore my dress blues. She wore a gown so simple and elegant that the photographs look timeless even now. For years, we were happy. Or at least, I thought we were. My military career kept me busy. Sometimes too busy. There were deployments where I'd be gone for 6 months, sometimes more. I'd send letters when I could, calls when the satellite link worked. And every time I came home, Sarah was there, smiling, arms open, telling me she missed me. There were small changes over the years, but I brushed them off. She started going out more when I was home. She took more girls' trips I wasn't invited to. She dressed differently, more expensive clothes, designer handbags I didn't remember buying. I told myself she deserved it. She'd put up with my absences, the stress of my career. Of course, she deserved nice things. The first real crack came one night when I came home early from the base. She wasn't expecting me. I'd told her I'd be late. While I walked in, she was on the phone in the kitchen. She froze when she saw me, quickly ending the call. Who was that? I asked. Just a friend, she said too quickly. Then she smiled, kissed my cheek, and started talking about dinner. Something in me knew it wasn't just a friend. But I'd spent years trusting her, leaning on her, building a life with her. I pushed the thought aside. Looking back now, I could see the signs were everywhere. The late-night texts she'd hide when I walked into the room. The way she'd get irritated if I asked too many questions. The sudden influx of jewelry I hadn't bought. But I didn't want to believe it. Because believing it meant admitting that the woman I'd built my life around might not be the woman I thought she was. One evening, about 8 years into our marriage, we attended a formal event hosted by a defense contractor. The kind of party where politicians and businessmen mingled with high-ranking officers. That's when I met David Ross for the first time. David was one of those men who spoke like he was always pitching something, even in casual conversation. He smiled too wide, laughed too loud, and looked at people like he was calculating their value in dollars. He shook my hand, gripped it a little too firmly, and said, "Lieutenant Colonel Ramirez, I've heard a lot about you." I didn't know it then, but he had already been circling my life, waiting for the right opening. And Sarah, she laughed at his jokes that night in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. That was the first time I felt it, a small, sharp twist of unease in my gut. But I still didn't know that my life was about to change forever. The months after that defense contractor's event felt off. Sarah was the same on the surface, smiling, affectionate when people were around, but there was a new distance in her eyes when we were alone. I told myself it was stress. Everyone has seasons in marriage where things aren't perfect. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. A few weeks later, I was given orders for a short-notice deployment overseas. It was only supposed to be 3 months, a quick operation compared to the year-long tours I'd done before. Sarah hugged me at the airport, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Come back safe." But her embrace felt practiced, like she'd said it before, like it wasn't really meant for me anymore. The operation went smoothly, at least from a military standpoint. But at night, when the desert winds rattled the tent flaps, I'd think about her. And those thoughts weren't comforting anymore. They were restless, gnawing at me. I called when I could. She'd answer, but there was always background noise, music, laughter, sometimes what sounded like glasses clinking. "Oh, just out with the girls," she'd say. 3 times, my calls went unanswered entirely. 3 times, she called back hours later with vague excuses. 2 months in, the mission wrapped earlier than expected. We were sent home with only 48 hours' notice. I didn't tell Sarah. I wanted to surprise her. I imagined walking through the front door, seeing her face light up, feeling her arms around me. Instead, I walked into silence. The house was dark except for a faint glow from the living room. I stepped inside quietly, my boots making soft thuds on the hardwood floor. The glow came from her phone, lying face down on the couch, buzzing with an incoming call. The name on the screen made my stomach drop, David Ross. I didn't answer it. Instead, I put the phone back exactly as I'd found it and waited. It was almost midnight when the front door opened and Sarah stepped inside. She was wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in loose curls, smelling faintly of expensive cologne, not hers. "Carlos," she said, startled. "You're home early." I studied her face, searching for the woman I'd married. But all I saw was someone who looked caught. "Where were you?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "Dinner with friends." "Which friends?" Her pause was just a fraction too long. "You don't know them." That night, I barely slept. I'd been trained to read patterns, to see connections others missed. And the pattern here was clear. The next morning, I made a call, not to a fellow officer, but to an old friend from my intelligence days. I told him I needed discreet surveillance, no questions asked. He didn't hesitate. Within a week, I had what I needed. Photos, videos, dates, Sarah and David at restaurants, hotels, his penthouse apartment, holding hands in public like they weren't even trying to hide. One photo burned itself into my mind. Sarah, in the same black dress she'd worn the night I came home early, leaning in to kiss him outside his car. Her smile in that moment was the same smile she used to give me. I waited until she came home one evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the photos spread in front of me. She froze when she saw them. Her eyes darted from the evidence to my face. "Carlos, I can explain," she started. "No," I said quietly. "You can't." She dropped the act then. No tears, no apologies, just a cold shrug. "You're always gone, Carlos. I'm tired of being married to a ghost. David, he's here. He gives me what I need." The words hit harder than any bullet I'd ever faced. But what broke me wasn't her leaving. It was how easy it was for her to walk away. Within a week, she'd moved out. Within 2, I saw a headline in a society magazine. Wealthy entrepreneur David Ross marries stunning socialite Sarah Ramirez. They'd gotten married in some cliffside villa, and they'd done it just days after she left me. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just shut down. But a soldier doesn't stay down forever. And even in that moment, sitting alone in the quiet of my empty house, a thought began to form. If David Ross thought he'd won, he had no idea what was coming. For the first few weeks after Sarah left, my house felt like a tomb. Her absence wasn't just physical. It was a ghost that haunted every room. The faint trace of her perfume in the bedroom. The coffee mug she always used still sitting in the cupboard. A single strand of her hair caught in the fibers of the couch. I could walk into a firefight without flinching, but coming home to that silence, that was a different kind of battlefield. The military trains you to function under stress, to compartmentalize pain until the mission's done. But there was no mission here. Just me, a half-empty house, and a heart that felt like it had been carved out with a dull knife. I stopped eating regularly. Sleep became a stranger. I'd wake in the middle of the night, thinking I'd heard her voice, only to realize it was just the echo of memory. Friends told me to move on. Easy words from people who hadn't had their life ripped out from under them. One evening, about a month in, I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey and the file my intelligence friend had sent me on David Ross. I hadn't looked through it fully before. I'd only taken what I needed to confront Sarah. Now, with nothing left to lose, I opened it again. The deeper I read, the more I realized something. David wasn't just some rich businessman. He was a predator. Questionable defense contracts that smelled of insider dealings. Shell companies in the Caribbean with millions flowing in and out. Payments to politicians that weren't labeled as donations. And there it was, the spark I needed. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was a man who had made enemies in the wrong places. And I had the skill set to turn those enemies into allies. I started small, reaching out to old contacts from my time in intelligence, people who owed me favors, people who trusted me. I didn't tell them everything at once, just enough to pique interest. I got a situation involving David Ross. Corruption, national security implications. The responses came fast. One of my old unit members was now working in cyber forensics. He offered to dig deeper into David's offshore accounts. Another contact in the Department of Defense quietly pulled old contracts for me to review. Piece by piece, the puzzle started forming. While the investigation grew in the background, I rebuilt myself. I treated recovery like basic training. 0500, wake up, run 5 miles. 0600, strength training. 0700, breakfast, news scan. 0800 to 1800, military duties, no distractions. 1900 to 2300, research, planning, coordination with contacts. Pain became fuel. Every time I felt the sting of betrayal, I turned it into another lead, another file, another late-night planning session. The more I learned, the more I realized David's downfall couldn't just be legal. It had to be spectacular. A quiet arrest wouldn't cut it. He needed to be destroyed in front of the same elite crowd that had toasted his perfect life. And there was only one way to make that happen. Get close enough to see his world from the inside, without him realizing it. Over the next 24 months, I quietly cultivated sources in his company, employees who resented his arrogance. I had journalists ready to run the story the moment I gave the word. I connected with investigators already circling him for unrelated deals, offering them evidence they didn't even know existed. By the time year 2 ended, I had a full dossier. Fraud, bribery, contract manipulation, illegal political contributions, money laundering. Enough to bury him under a mountain of legal trouble. Then came the final piece. An embossed invitation addressed to Lieutenant General Carlos Ramirez to attend David and Sarah's 3rd wedding anniversary celebration. A gala, open bar, half the city's elite in attendance. The perfect stage for the kill shot. As I held that invitation, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day Sarah left. A calm, cold certainty. I wasn't just going to destroy David Ross. I was going to make sure Sarah saw it happen. The invitation sat on my desk for a full day before I responded. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted David's assistant to hear the hesitation in my voice when I called. I'm not sure I should attend, I told her, pausing just long enough for her to reassure me. Oh, General Ramirez, they'd be honored to have you there. You're practically family. Family. The word tasted bitter. I'll be there, I said at last. The week before the gala, my house turned into a command center. Files were spread across my dining table, color-coded by category. Contracts, bank transfers, shell corporations, bribery records. My cyber forensics contact delivered the final batch, a series of encrypted emails between David and a foreign contractor, negotiating illegal arms sales under the guise of equipment upgrades. One of those contractors was already under federal investigation. All I had to do was connect the dots and make sure those dots were visible to the right people. I reached out to two trusted journalists, both known for exposing corruption. I gave them just enough to run a teaser piece, a subtle questions surrounding a prominent businessman's dealings article, 2 days before the gala. It was bait, and David took it. The day before the party, a mutual acquaintance told me David had been on the phone furious about the piece, promising to deal with it personally. Good. Let him think he could spin this. He had no idea the storm was already overhead. That morning, I met with a federal investigator in a coffee shop 3 blocks from my house. I handed over a flash drive containing everything. Every transaction, every falsified contract, every shred of proof. When this hits, I told him, you'll have probable cause for a raid within hours. He didn't ask why I was doing this. Some things are better left unspoken. The gala was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, the kind of place where the chandeliers are imported from Italy and the champagne is older than most of the guests. I arrived in full dress uniform, medals gleaming under the warm glow of the lights. Heads turned as I walked in, not because of the uniform, though that always carried weight, but because I walked like I belonged there. Across the room, I saw Sarah. She looked almost exactly as she had the night I met her. Perfect hair, perfect smile. But when her eyes found mine, the smile faltered. She clutched David's arm like a drowning woman holding on a driftwood. I didn't approach them right away. Instead, I made my rounds, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, subtly pointing journalists toward the stage where David would be speaking. My contact from the press arrived 15 minutes later, briefcase in hand. Inside were printed copies of the most damning documents, each marked for easy reading. Another ally, a young tech who owed me a favor, was already in the control booth, ready to override the ballroom's projection system at my signal. When a string quartet stopped playing, David stepped onto the stage. He tapped the microphone, smiling that same smug smile he'd worn the first time we met. Friends, he began, tonight is about love, loyalty, and celebrating the partnerships that make life worth living. The hypocrisy was so thick I could barely breathe. I moved closer, my shoes silent on the marble floor. David went on, thanking guests, praising Sarah, talking about integrity and honor like the words meant something to him. And then, at the precise moment he paused to take a sip of champagne, I gave the signal. The massive screen behind him flickered. The elegant slideshow of him and Sarah dissolved into a spreadsheet. Transactions, offshore accounts, contract kickbacks. Gasps rippled through the crowd. David turned, confusion flashing across his face. Then came the photos, grainy surveillance images of him meeting with known arms traffickers, shaking hands over unmarked crates. Whispers turned to open murmurs. Cameras began clicking, not for him but at him. My contact in the press stepped forward, slipping copies of the documents to the nearest journalists. Questions started flying. What about these payments, Mr. Ross? Is it true you bribed officials in 3 countries? Care to comment on the arms deals? David's face drained of color. He tried to laugh it off, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Security moved in, not his security, but the hotel's, clearing a path as 2 federal agents approached. I watched from the edge of the room as they placed him in handcuffs, reading him his rights in front of 100 of his so-called friends. Sarah just stood there, frozen. She didn't move when the agents led David away. Didn't move when the photographers turned their lenses on her. Only when the room's attention shifted back to the murmured chaos did she look at me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just held her gaze for a long, cold second and then turned away. The ballroom emptied faster than I expected. People who had been laughing with David minutes earlier now whispered in tight clusters, throwing quick glances at Sarah like she was a sideshow attraction. I stayed near the back wall, letting the chaos swirl around me. The agents had taken David out through the main entrance, deliberately, I suspected, so the press could get their shots. The champagne still sparkled in crystal glasses, untouched. The roses decorating the tables were perfect and fresh, but the air reeked of something rotten. She spotted me before I could slip out. Her heels clicked across the marble floor, each step sharp and deliberate. "Carlos," she said, voice tight. "We need to talk." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. Her makeup was flawless, her dress expensive, but her eyes, they were panicked. Not the panic of someone who's just lost a husband. The panic of someone realizing her safety net had vanished. "I didn't know about any of this," she said quickly. "David, he told me everything was above board." "I swear." I raised an eyebrow. "And you believed him? Just like you believed me when I told you I'd always be there for you." She flinched. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw the Sarah I used to know, the one who laughed with me in a small Italian restaurant, the one who kissed me goodbye at airports. But that woman was gone. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice softer now. I thought I needed something else. But I was wrong." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You didn't just choose him over me, Sarah. You chose greed over loyalty, comfort over honor. And the thing about comfort is it disappears fast when the money's gone." Her lips trembled. "Can we at least—" "No," I cut in. "There's nothing to salvage here. I buried the man who loved you the day you walked out. This is what you see now. This is just what's left." I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned, walking past the wilted remains of the party, past the guests who avoided my eyes, and out into the cool night air. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement. For the first time in years, my chest felt light. Not because the pain was gone, but because I'd carried it to its conclusion. Revenge hadn't brought Sarah back. It hadn't erased the betrayal. But it had reminded me of who I was before she tried to break me. A man of discipline, of strategy, of quiet, unshakable resolve. In the weeks that followed, David's empire crumbled. His assets were frozen, his business licenses revoked. He was indicted on multiple charges and faced a prison sentence that would outlast whatever was left of his reputation. Sarah? Last I heard, she'd sold the penthouse and was living in a rented apartment under her maiden name. The society pages didn't mention her anymore. As for me, I went back to my work, my men, and my mission. I rose again in the ranks, not because I needed another medal, but because I refused to let betrayal define my story. Some battles are fought on the battlefield. Others are fought in the quiet spaces between heartbreak and redemption. And the sweetest victories are the ones your enemies never see coming. Some people think revenge is about destruction, about breaking the person who hurt you. But the truth? The most satisfying revenge isn't about them at all. It's about standing in the wreckage they built for themselves and realizing you don't even need to lift a finger anymore. David lost everything. Sarah lost the life she thought would keep her warm. And me? I walked away with my honor intact and a future they'll never touch. Because in the end, the greatest victory is knowing you won't waste another second on people who already destroyed themselves. Asterisk, if this story hit you as hard as it hit me while telling it, smash that like button, because it tells YouTube this is the kind of justice people need to hear. And I want to know, if you could serve justice to someone who wronged you, what would you do? Drop your story in the comments, because I might just tell it next. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that'll make you believe karma is very real.